Salvete discipuli. First, and above all, I want to welcome you back from what I hope were restful and absolutely wonderful Easter breaks. In this video, I want to spend a little bit of time, and it will be short, walking through the translation of select passages from Millionaire's Dinner Party, Book 5. When we left Trimalchio, the dinner party was well underway. As we resume, Trimalchio suddenly rises and excuses himself from the table. He is apparently feeling a little unwell. We've all seen this, where a guest at a party we're having suddenly is overcome with indigestion and needs to excuse himself or herself and make a rather quick dash to the washroom. That's what Trimalchio has just done. While he's gone, the guests converse among themselves, covering all kinds of odd and somewhat trivial topics of conversation. Nothing that is really memorable or compelling. And as this chapter begins, Trimalchio re-enters the dining room, looking quite a bit better than when he left. I hope you've had a chance, before we get started, to have reviewed the vocabulary for this section, which I posted in the formative as a Quizlet. I can't stress often or strongly enough how important vocabulary mastery is to the effective and competent translation of Latin, or for that matter, of any language. Beyond vocabulary, it might be good, before you get started, to review a couple of constructions that occur occasionally in this section. One of them is the ablative absolute, which ablative absolutes appear in this text in red. The basic ablative absolute, you'll recall, is composed of a participle in the ablative case and a noun also in the ablative case. The participle is typically, though by no means always, a perfect passive participle, and ablative absolutes are usually used to mark the time or the circumstances under which the action of a main clause takes place. The translation of an ablative absolute with a participle with a perfect passive participle, the standard translation would be with noun having been verbed. Another reminder involves indirect statement. You'll recall that indirect statements are usually introduced by a verb of the head. I think, I say, I feel, I see, I hear, all kinds of verbs that have to do with thinking or with perceiving. And those verbs are then followed not by a subordinating conjunction like ut or ne or cum or any of several others, but rather by an infinitive plus an accusative in construction. I should have put that as an accusative plus infinitive construction. The ablative absolutes that occur in this section are marked in blue. And please note that the intro verb, the verb of the head in each of those ablative absolutes, is underlined. Puto, you can see, and skio. If over the break you've forgotten how either ablative absolutes or indirect statements work in Latin, how they appear and how to recognize them, you might want to take a few minutes now to refresh your memory. The first sentence is somewhat long, namely 3 lines, starting with eius and going all the way down to respondent. But as we will see, it is not particularly complicated. We find out that fabulae, stories, eius modi, of this kind, of this sort, vibrabant, were buzzing about. I think that's probably the best translation of vibro. Typically that could mean flash or to gleam, but obviously stories don't gleam. They're kind of buzzing about the room. The guests are conversing with themselves, and fabulae eius modi, stories of this nature, are buzzing about. Cum, when, and I know that cum means when here because the verb intrawit is in the indicative mood. When Trimalchio entered, and de terza fronte, with his brow, with his forehead having been wiped, we would probably put that better into English, having wiped his forehead, he laveted, he washed his hands. Note that manus, the fourth declension noun, is in the accusative plural. He washed his hands. He bathed his hands with perfume or with unguents. I suppose it might even be hand sanitizer these days, with some kind of a lotion. And the K here. Now we encounter yet another ablative absolute, spatio minimo interposito, with a small space, and we have to understand of time, interposito, interposed. What this means is, and after a short time, inquit, Trimalchio said, ignoscite mihi, forgive me, amici, friends. And then he tells why he is asking for their pardon or their forgiveness. He says, my stomach, my belly, my venter, non responded, doesn't respond to me now, multis diebus, for several days in this ablative of time. So to go through the whole thing, stories like this, stories of this sort were buzzing about when Trimalchio entered, and having wiped his forehead and bathed his hands with some kind of lotion, shortly, or in a short time, he said, forgive me, friends, my stomach has not responded to me for many days. He's saying he's felt a little bit under the weather for quite some time. He goes on to say, nec medici me iuvare possunt, a very simple sentence. And doctors, medici, a medicus is a doctor, and doctors, possunt, aren't able to iuvare, to help, to aid me. He goes on to say that tamen, still, nevertheless, malicorium, and malicorium is the rind or the peel of a pomegranate, used as a sort of drug or remedy in the ancient world. But pomegranate rind, profuit, has profited, and we note that you profit to someone in the dative, has helped me. And I hope, recreatus sum, I'm refreshed, aliquid, an accusative used adverbially to a certain extent. I am feeling a little better, is what aliquid recreatus sum. I'm refreshed aliquid a bit. Alioquin, not an unusual word, but one that we're encountering for the first time, meaning still, something like this. Nonetheless, it sounds around the stomach to me, and here's a dative of possession, the stomachum mihi, the stomach to me, which is simply translated as my stomach. Still, it sounds around my stomach. You would think, torum, it was a bull. Note that Trimalchio is speaking in, when I say vulgar Latin, I don't mean something lower class, just the way you would talk in normal conversation. He is not using high-end classical kinds of constructions. He's not speaking like Cicero delivering a speech. He is speaking like the typical man on the street. And what he says is, still, my stomach makes a noise like a bull. You'd think it was a bull snorting or something. Kind of a little bit of an inappropriate observation, but a little bit cute as well. Then he continues, and so, si quis vestrum, if any of you wants to leave, wants to get up and go, to exit, and here this implied is to go to the washroom, non est cur, there is no reason why pudiat eum, and pudet is a impersonal verb. There's no reason why it should embarrass or shame him. In other words, he's saying there's no reason to feel ashamed. Remember that quis is just a form of aliquis. After si, nisi, num, and ne, we recall. Ali, as in aliquis, takes a holiday. So instead of saying si aliquis, Latin simply says si quis. And so, if any of you, Westrum, this is the partitive genitive form of vos. Remembering that vos has two genitives. Westri, when you want to make it an objective genitive, God's love of you, directed towards you, God's love of you, with you as an object, would be westri. But some of us, when we're using the genitive partitively, one of us, two of us, three of us, some of us, a few of us, you would use the um ending. So and so, if any of you wishes to exit, there's no reason why. There's no reason why it should shame him. There's no reason to feel ashamed, is the way that would translate into standard English. He goes on to say that nemo nostrum, that same construction of quis vestrum, any of you, no one of us, again from noster, nostrum, no one of us is born solide, is born solid. None of us is this solid kind of thing. And so he goes on to say, and this is actually kind of a truly inappropriate but kind of funny thing to say. He says, I think nullum tormentum esse tantum. I think no torment, no torture is, in the indirect statement, tantum, so great, quam, here, as to continere se, as to hold oneself. He says, I know of no torture as great as holding it in. And then he really goes off the deep end. He says, I know, multos sic periisse. I know that many, perio, have died, seek in this way, while they did not wish, while they nolod, dicere verum sibi, while they didn't want to speak the truth to themselves, since they didn't want to admit they had this sort of intestinal or digestive problem. I probably shouldn't be laughing. Constipation can be kind of there are two ways to look at it. Constipation can be a pretty trivial kind of, I shouldn't say trivial, it always hurts, but it can be a not very serious kind of problem, easily remedied by laxatives. And that's exactly what malacorium functions as. This pomegranate rind would be functioning as a laxative. But it's important to remember that constipation can also be a very serious sign of colon cancer. And here is a place where we get into a little bit of Roman medicine. I won't go into it too deeply at this point, but I will simply observe, for the standard kind of problem, Rome had many remedies. Doctors could help with herbal remedies, much as we've seen here, like pomegranate rind. However, for internal maladies, for things like cancers, for internal blockages, there was very little that Roman medicine could do. That's simply an aside. I hope you understand the Latin. When you are done with this, I'm asking you to answer a few questions on the passage, and we'll see how that goes. Have great days.